Hey guys, welcome to episode 34 of the 1023 Soul Shop Talk podcast. Today we've got a little bit of a new format, and we'll see how it works out. I think it'll be fun. Today's episode, like normal, is sponsored by us, 1023 Diesel. This podcast and all of its glory is completely free because, well, we pay for it. But one of the things that's really beneficial that especially has come out of this podcast is our build plan. So if you are a 7.3 person, you own a 7.3, and you're looking for advice on your build before you get into it, and hopefully to prevent you from making mistakes in parts purchases, if you go to our website, 1023, so 1023diesel.com, and then click on the Plan Your Build tab, you can fill out that form and then schedule a time to talk to us. And we can spend about 30 minutes or so talking about your truck. Also today, we may be charging in the future. We may start charging for custom tuning for the PHP Hydras, and we'll talk a little bit about why. We're going to do another section on covering your questions, so just emails that we've been sent over the last week or so. We're going to answer some of the questions from those emails. And then our new segment, we have automotive news and trends. So that's going to be added to the end here. And for sure, if you guys want, let us know what you think about it. So, we can keep preparing. We've got quite a lot of time into planning, just like finding articles and what to talk about and making sure that it's like somewhat useful. And we're happy to do it. Just know that it's a lot of work, and we won't do it if it's not appreciated. So if you can, if you're on Apple Podcasts, drop a comment in there and let us know. If you're watching on YouTube, put a comment on there, let us know you appreciate it or not. Or you can shoot us an email to media, media at 1023diesel.com. So we might be charging for tuning. In the past, we haven't charged for custom tuning when you purchased injectors from us, and we may start. And it's kind of been like when we first got into this scene, there was a lot of people that were just giving away like canned tunes without support or something for free, and a lot of companies were charging like partial price for tuning when you purchase injectors. And we, honestly, as a way of being new but still being like valid in the market, we didn't charge for custom tuning with injectors, and it was it did help kind of get our name out there, and it's been that way ever since. So the problem that we're running into now is that almost all of the tuning that we support is tuning that's included with parts. And so we have like basically no income from tuning, even though we have like one entire position, like Vaughn's entire position is supporting tuning. And so, and that's been fine because that facilitated that people would buy parts from us, and also through like our education side of things, made good choices on parts. And so it was, it's become a very smooth process. And I was okay with it because, we sold more parts that were profitable by offering tuning with them, because it was, a better value to you guys that were buying.
I think I want to say something as far as clarifying the idea of the can tune option, right? I think it's important to note, right, that I think what sets us or anybody in the custom tuning space apart, and I think it's important for everybody to understand, the only difference between your quote-unquote can tunes and your custom tuning for your 7.3 liter Power Stroke is that one has support and one doesn't. They're the same files, they're built the same, they're built for the same vehicle. Yep. Unfortunately, I can guarantee you're not special in your vehicle. We've come across tens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of them. So that being said, again, the only difference between your can tuning and your custom tuning, we can't really know or do anything special for you ahead of time. And I think we've made that pretty clear throughout, however many podcasts that we've been on. But the important part being that one has support and one doesn't. and we're offering support, right? Meaning that if there's something that we can change, we can talk about that, we can make those changes for you. And that's the idea when we talk about custom, at least our brand of it. Can't speak for everybody in our market, but I can at least say for us what the model is and the product that we sell.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. I was I was trying to avoid getting into things. We have so many other things to talk about. It feels like all those little details can turn into an entire another episode. But
and I think I just wanted to clarify the idea of what the difference between the services, right? What you're getting, so then you could sort of lead into the idea of why we think it's important from the
So moving forward, and we don't know yet like how much or when, but there will be a time somewhat in the very near future where we will be charging for tuning. Really what it comes down to is there's two factors. One, it's a lot of support and it costs us a lot of money, like quite a lot of money to keep offering something like this, like that is a product and it's a service for free. And on top of that, it's becoming a lot more costly. It's getting a lot more expensive to offer this, because, partly because of like regulations, like we are, working towards making it so like our tuning is like 50 state legal, and usable on any 7.3, like whatever we build tunes for, it will be legal for, in all states. And that's quite costly. And that's also a piece of moving forward. Like in order for this industry to exist, that has to happen. Like these changes need to be made. And like on top of being costly to begin with, we're adding a massive cost for that also. And so, there's a little bit more to it than that, but the basics are we are going to be charging for tuning. I don't know how much, but it is quite justified and it's quite time, in my opinion, too. But we are going to try to make it still, very cost effective for people that are trying to upgrade their trucks.
And I think to some degree we have changed our model of support, in that we're offering more of it because we're capable of it. Mm-hmm. And I think that has led to quite a few, or higher than over the years has increased, to where we are supporting more than than the product we're producing, right? My job, when we talk about my whole position, is supporting 7.3 liter tuning. Throughout the week, we're talking less than 10%, if that, with over a month, is actually making adjustments for anybody. The rest is all diagnostics, right? And like we've said over the past few episodes, that's not a direct service that we offer because we can't. Diagnostic usually has to happen with the vehicle in front of you, right? So we try our best, but ultimately we have no choice to help people understand the decision that we have to make of where the line has to be drawn of us helping you. What this is a support problem, this is a vehicle problem, versus, well, this may be a personality thing that you're looking for and we may be able to do it for you or we may not. And I think we're pretty clear about that in our calibration terms and conditions page that I make everybody very aware of. But those are the important things that we've stepped up to do over the past few years, way more than we have. So that increasingly is getting more difficult to sustain, I think. Yeah,
and that was something that all on its own, that was something that took a very long time to figure out. Was like if we're selling you tuning, we are not selling you diagnostics. That's not what you're purchasing. But what happens is when you purchase tuning or you purchase parts in tuning or whatever, inevitably it ends up falling in our lap, that it becomes our responsibility, like by default, to help you make sure your truck runs right. And so, I would say, legally, it's not our job to make sure that your truck works right when you decide to modify it. Who else are you going to turn to? That's kind of the question. And so we've tried to build a path where, we will from the beginning, before you make any choices, let's make sure that you're set up for it. You understand the problems that could come along with deciding to modify your truck, understand all the consequences. And if you accept them, you're okay with them, understand that your truck needs to be prepared for them and you need to be prepared for them. And then once you purchase them, be able to support you and knowing that you can call us when there's a problem, and we accept that responsibility. But if you want us to accept that responsibility, it is going to cost something, which we haven't been charging for. We just keep offering more and more of that service because it sort of feels like it is like there isn't anyone else who can help you. And so like kind of by default, we do.
And I think this has been, this has been a series of discussions over years and years of we know that this costs, if not we're losing money, quite a bit to some degree, with the service, and over time, on average with a series of customers, this is something we've known for a long period of time, right?
Yeah, this isn't just like a quick decision by any means. It's taken a long time to try to get to these choices, for sure. And to figure out like how to properly support this, because there's not exactly like books written on how to support something like this. Or maybe there is, and I'm just not smart enough how to find them. But
I mean, that makes two of us, but sure.
Yeah. So I've got a couple questions here. We've got, I've got 4 questions. We're going to go ahead and run through some of these before we get into automotive news, which I'm kind of excited about. The first one is from Ben. It says, I just listened to your podcast, episode 32. He says, I'm really enjoying your podcast, and I have a question about one of your answers. So I'm answering a question about a question from the last one. One of the questions was asking about pairing 180/30 injectors with a KC Stage 2 turbo, and you mentioned that you did not recommend that turbo for those injectors. He says, I'm running a 175/30 injector and a KC balanced assembly. I love the power, but I'm running into EGT issues when under heavy throttle. He says in the 1023 Daily Driver Tune. I'm just curious, what would you recommend for a drop-in turbo, if not a KC Stage 2? He says, I know that a T4 kit is the best option, but I just replaced the up pipes, the turbo pedestal, I did a back pressure valve delete. I have a 2003 Excursion. It's a daily driver, family hauler, occasional tow rig, and off-road.
If you don't mind, I'm going to jump in here right away.
Yep.
There's a few things that stand out to me. And before we would get into answering any of those questions, first and foremost, as I always preach, there's probably some other stuff that I would ask about. First off, what size are your tires? Where's your altitude? Or what altitude are you mostly driving around in? If you're over 3,500 feet, you're probably always going to deal with these types of problems, and it's hard to say what turbo, and we could get into that in a little bit, I'm not necessarily saying that this is immediately a turbo fault. I think we're both in agreement on that right away. But excursions are heavy. Everybody knows I absolutely hate excursions. If you don't, now you do, for a lot of reasons, but one of the biggest ones is just people's expectations with how hefty of a vehicle they are. So that always adds a handful of other complications. So I probably, like I said, want to know a handful more information about altitude, tire size, if anything's been done there, if you have larger than stock size tires, where the EGT issues you're running into, if you're actually seeing, 1300 or higher regularly, and, about where that's happening. On top of that, obviously the biggest things, since this has come apart, it's basically free to do all of the basic tests like we went over in last episode. Charge air, pressure tests, exhaust leak tests, especially when you've done turbo work. There's a lot of chances for you to, miss something there. Fuel pressure, and then the next thing would be high pressure oil system. If that hasn't been gone through and verified, chances are, if you have over 200,000 miles in your high pressure oil pump, no matter what it is, you're probably going to need to look into that. I just do that every single day, multiple times a day. So
yeah,
those would be all the first things to check out before we jumped into turbos.
Yes, exactly. And if all those things, let's just say, if all those things work out and we go through all that and you still want to upgrade the turbo, I would like to answer that I know a T4 kit is the best option point first. A T4 kit is not always the best option. That is definitely not true. And you are correct to say that, especially if you're staying with a 30% nozzle and down, and so in the case of what we would recommend, it'd be like a 180/30 and down. And especially if you've already done up pipes and the pedestal and all of that anyway, a T4 kit is most definitely not the best option. It would be a very expensive choice to make, and likely not be worth it. In that the gain in usable power or drivability of the truck would not very far, if any, exceed what a good drop-in turbo would do. And
it's kind of difficult. What you're getting at to some degree is the financial side of saying, a couple $1,000s, a little bit over that, for likely no power performance difference, especially if you're only in the daily driver. You really shouldn't notice any power performance difference there. So a little bit of drivability and, a couple 100 degrees maybe off your EGTs, it's kind of hard to justify, especially like you just said, if you spent all of that time and money on replacing the setup that you already have, right? To then spend a couple $1,000s more to replace all of that again for not a whole lot of added benefit. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And it's like, what I'll say is like, if you hate your money, I guess you go ahead and just spend a crap load of it. But I don't, regardless of like how much money you feel like spending on your truck, like worth it is kind of subjective, but I don't think that a T4 kit does always make sense. Like there's a lot of reasons to not put a T4 kit on your truck. And in general, if you're...
The difference lies in the word best option. I think you and I have had this discussion almost every day of the definition of best between us and a customer. There really is no such thing, and I think I will try my best to preach this as much as possible, at least from here until I come up with a better term, is that there is no such thing as just best. So we end up trying to determine what's best for you, and that comes to a lot of factors, like we just went over the financial aspect of that, the time investment, and the potential outcome. So what's best, right, if we're talking in terms of performance, there is a little bit of a difference there, but what's best to you, and what are you willing to pay for what's best for you?
Right. Yeah. And I would say, like, if your options are between like let's just say a T4 kit with like an S364.5 SXE, which is, if you were going to go T4 route with that injector, is probably what I would usually choose, versus a KC Stage 1 or a KC Stage 2, the power difference is not going to be there. Like, maybe in some scenarios, the 364.5 on a T4 mount option would be like you'd have a higher threshold for usable power, meaning like EGT stay down, and I guess that's about it. But likely not worth for most people to spend another $1,500 or $2,000 on. I would say likely for most people that would not be the case. As for like why I don't recommend the KC Stage 2 for a 30% nozzle, or in this case he says a 175/30, because a KC Stage 2 is not, it's not going to make more, like ultimately make more power. Like the larger turbine wheel with that nozzle, for the way you're going to use the truck, or the reason you would choose that injector, is not going to make more power, probably anywhere. It may help lower exhaust temps a little bit, or help lower back pressure a little bit, like wide open throttle at high RPM in a race tune. But
I mean, there's a difference in saying, okay, is it going to make more power at the same pedal position? That's really not worth the discussion. That's very complicated, and it would really only matter if we tested every setup on the dyno, which to some degree we plan to do, but that's not really a question we can answer, and I don't think anybody can answer that honestly.
Yeah.
So answering the question of, is it just going to make more power, isn't really worth the discussion, especially since we're not comparing, wide open throttle and the highest power tune regardless. And again, that would be the only scenario that I would recommend. It's really hard for me to say because the rest of the files that we send out, the rest of the calibrations are not meant for the same type of performance aspects. I mean, our goal is performance, but we tend to focus a bit more on drivability in general, and you'll see that throughout my descriptions all over the website. So, unless we're talking about pure performance, I'm not really probably going to engage in a discussion of, 10 or 15 more horsepower at the same pedal position. It's not really something we're going to focus on, right? So
what it comes down to is drivability. and the smaller, like KC Stage 1 turbo, if we're just talking between a drop-in turbos, is going to be more drivable, and that's going to be more responsive. Basically, in any usable range of the truck, any RPM or pedal range, you're actually going to be using it. The KC Stage 1 is going to be more responsive, and more than likely will also help you manage EGTs better too, because it's going to be more responsive at a lower RPM. And so going up to a bigger turbo that's going to make negligible difference in like power, which, like I said, that's a complicated subject. It really just comes down to the usability of the truck and how is it going to drive and where is it going to be able to make usable power for you. And that's like a KC Stage 1 is where the best fit would be for most people. Especially,
so I think it's fair to sum this up in saying something along the lines of it probably, for most people, swapping turbochargers on the drop-in platform from, say, the balanced assembly, again, I'm arguing for most people, to, say, a KC or KC Stage 1 or 2, may not be worth it, especially if you've just done most of this work. I think for most people, and if you want to disagree with me, go ahead, but I think that's pretty fair to say. And for most people in this position, unless you hate your money, then a T4 kit's probably not that worth it either.
Yeah. The only time I'd make the argument for a T4 kit on this size injector, because of the choice, the reason you would choose this size injector, is on an old body style truck that you also are going to be intercooling and still needs up pipes and a pedestal and a down pipe and all of that stuff anyway. Then it starts to make sense because it's going to cost about the same amount of money. And it does open you up for some other options down the road. But other than that, like I definitely wouldn't go the T4 route.
And then I guess there's one other thing I wanted to say that just kind of led into this when we talked about fuel injectors. Just one brief little thing. I see this all the time. I think it's very important that everybody understands that you should choose a fuel injector size based on performance, price, and performance goals, and then drivability. So I guess I kind of overlap two of those, but those are of the most important that we're always going to talk with you about. You don't pick a fuel injector size, in our opinion, and we won't really help you very much with this in this scenario because of this, and how often we see it. You need to pick a fuel injector size for all of those reasons. Drivability, performance goals, and money-wise for you. So those would be the things you pick a fuel injector size for, not because you bought other parts and you need to just make them work, right? So I think it's pretty important that you should pick fuel injectors to match what your goals are, not to fit the rest of the parts.
Yeah. I would say it's less common that I see people wanting to buy injectors to fit the rest of the parts. It's usually the opposite. It's like, yeah, I've done all this stuff, but I want to get injectors that are too big because you can turn them down, right? Which I don't have time to go down that road. We're going to run out of time here, and we have other stuff to cover. But I would say it's very common. What I see is like probably one of the most common things I see for guys that already know they want to upgrade their injectors and other parts to go with it, and they just like daily drive and tow with their truck is, and I know a lot of people disagree with me on this, but they'll say like, I want to at like a 205/80. Like that's what everybody says they want. It happens like every day. But they don't want to do like head studs and valve springs and push rods and a complete fuel system and all those things. And then, my argument is always, and they say like, oh, I'm not, I don't need those parts because I'm not trying to use it to make 450, 480 horsepower. It's like, well, then why put a 205/80 in it? Like you wouldn't need the head studs and valve springs and push rods and fuel system and all that stuff to go with it if you're not going to use the power. But then why put those injectors in it and deal with the issues of a larger nozzle and spend more money on it if you're not going to use the power? It doesn't make sense. So then being practical about what is your actual goal. And I think like it's easy to say like pick an injector for your goal, and that's true, except you have to figure out what your goal is first and why. And that's usually what the struggle is.
Sure. Yeah. And of all of this discussion we've had multiple times, I think our last episode covered quite a bit on your daily driver tow guys that want to go with a much oversized fuel injector. When my argument, and still will always be, if you don't plan on using it, there's no point, right? You're just shifting your window of drivability up into the higher horsepower range where you're not likely to use it, and you're reducing your effective horsepower range in the range that you want to use it. So then you lose your drivability. That's effectively what's happening. So there's no reason to do that, especially if our first questions are along the lines of, do you even use what you already have? Are you wide open throttle all of the time in whatever program you have, in the fuel injector size you have, and it's still not enough? If you're not, then you're probably not using it, and we can do plenty for you to make up for that difference, right? So just in calibration. So if you want to work with us on that, I mean, I'm willing to help you achieve those types of goals, right? If you're looking for that. Right, just understanding that if you aren't using the horsepower you already have, then understanding that you still probably have more room to go, and there's really no sense in sacrificing your drivability for horsepower that not only do you not use now, but you're likely never to use.
All right, so this is a good one. So many questions that we'll probably just answer with no, but we'll see. It says, hello, thank you for your time. I've got a 2001 F350 7.3 dually. It's an automatic with 230,000 miles. The truck pulls 10 to 14,000 pound fifth wheel toy hauler. I have a few questions. Number one, what is the minimum compression? Yeah, it doesn't work like that. So compression matters. I'm going to give you a very general overview. There's no, I wouldn't say that there's a number that means compression is bad, and there's not a number that means compression is good. What matters the most is that compression is consistent. So if you've got, 7 cylinders at 400 PSI, and then you've got one cylinder that's at, 300 PSI, you've got a compression problem on one cylinder, which means you need to probably consider rebuilding the engine. You've probably got some damage. 300.
I like to bring up these questions a lot, and so a lot of customers, no matter what the setup is, I will
why are you asking? That's what I like to ask is why are you asking that question?
Yeah. Well, okay. So a lot of customers will get confused when I ask them, what is your compression? And I will ask just about anybody, regardless of their setup, if they've ever tested it, just to ask them. If they have the numbers, that's usually a pretty good step, depending on what the question and concern is. As far as the calibration side of things and what I have to deal with in support, I like to know your compression information if you have it, because if you're not maintaining, if you don't have engine compression, even if they're all even, but if the engine is evenly low on compression all the way around, well, then you have a low efficiency engine, right? And that's a big problem because that's extremely difficult to diagnose. And so plenty of customers have come to me and I stop them at the brick wall of, I need you to test compression before we go any further, because this is going to be a massive waste of time if your engine low on compression. And believe it or not, this happens quite often. Yeah. I'd say probably once a week. We get at least one low compression engine, whether it be a single cylinder down, or the entire engine down, or customers that have rebuilt their engine or are planning on rebuilding their engine because they're low in compression. Those are all pretty important. These engines do wear just like any other engine, and they will be low in compression if you're concerned about it. It's pretty easy to test. Overall, I think it's important that you understand that if you know your engine or you're concerned about your engine being low in compression, you should test it.
And
right?
Contrary to popular belief, 7.3s are not a million-mile engine. I don't know how that became a thing that everyone, so many people call me and they're like, yeah, it's a million-mile engine. It's only got 250,000 miles on it. I'm like, bro, you probably need an engine.
Right.
That's all. That's not no miles. I wouldn't just count on it that it's a quarter of the way to dying. There's a lot of variables there. So.
Right, and we joke about this a lot because we get it a lot, and the fact being that we do handle quite a bit of customers that have major engine failures or major rebuilding engines because of minor or major engine failures, such as a single cylinder compression loss, cracked pistons. What I tend to come across of when I usually ask customers why they rebuilt their engine, what caused them to do this, usually falls along lines of cracked pistons or ringlands. Are usually pretty common, and we could get into a whole story of what that is. I'm probably not the right guy to answer those questions, but yeah. They fail, and they fail pretty often. So I think that's pretty important for people to understand. I'm not trying to scare anybody, but I am trying to let you know, if you come to me and tell me that you have a 230,000 mile engine and you're not expecting me to be a little bit leery of the situation, being that you may, especially if you're concerned about what your compression is, that I'm going to hit you with, you probably shouldn't go any further until you test it. And if it's low in compression, I really don't want to help you, in the sense of, there's nothing I'm going to do to fix that, and anything we try to do is going to be a band-aid, and you need to worry about your engine and repair it.
Yeah. Question number 2 from Michael. CCV going into a catch can. Yes, no, pros or cons?
From the emission standpoint, the answer is yes. Needs to be in a catch can. And overall, I think that's pretty important. There are plenty of different types that you can install. Some people make some pretty sick ones that you can get your hands on.
Yeah, you got to be leery of it, because, like, especially like up here in Alaska, like, there's a pretty big problem with them freezing, like the breathers on them freezing, and then you will just start blowing seals out. So, yes, if you're in a climate like that isn't 30 below zero, it could make sense. Or if you have a way of making sure that it doesn't freeze, that's probably fine. But they do condensate if it's in a cold climate, and they can freeze. I mean, that comes back to a question of why. There's probably a good chance if your truck is fairly stock that you should just leave it where it is in your intake. That's my argument. But
I would 100% agree. If you have the opportunity to leave it factory routed, leave it factory routed, or route it. If you have some amount of custom intake, to route it in the factory position, because I would argue that that's the easiest and best, and overall not going to get yourself in trouble scenario. And that's really the only thing that we can advocate for. But as far as externally routed, I suppose you probably should look up your locality. But as far as what we can tell you to do, catch can would be the only option for that.
Yeah. Question 3: why do you suggest a lower horsepower for towing? Which is it's a very big misunderstanding of what we've been talking about forever. It's not that we say you should make less power to tow with, or that that's not the point. The point is that, one, your truck was made to handle like your whole truck, the cooling system, the hard parts, like the components in the engine and the transmission and your drivetrain, were made to be stock at 175 to 275 horsepower. The further you deviate from that, one, you have limits of your turbo is at whatever altitude. Your turbo is only going to be able to handle, let's say, like, to use common terms, like, handle so much fuel. You're only going to be able to make so much power without having EGT problems. You're only going to be able to make so much power before you cause, like, damage to hard parts. You're only going to be able to make so much power before your cooling system does not have the threshold to keep up. And so it's not that we suggest a lower horsepower number for towing. It's that if you're actually working your truck, you are going to have, like, mechanical limits to how much power you can make, and that your build should be geared towards what you're actually doing with it. And if that is working with the truck, don't try to make more power than what it's capable of. Don't, like we've talked about already in this podcast, don't buy injectors that are too big for what you're actually going to be using them for. So you're going to cause yourself more headaches than it's worth, and probably spend more money than it's worth. Don't buy a turbo that's way too big for what your usable range of the truck is going to be, because it's just going to drive worse. It's not going to be of any benefit to you. So it's not that we suggest a lower power for towing. It's that it's necessary to make your build geared towards a usable power for working it.
So the idea, the theoretical topic here is duty cycle, or build designed at duty cycle. So how much horsepower is the engine producing over what period of time? Okay, so again, we talked about cooling capacity, right? The engine, the cooling system, so that involves passages, the head design, pump, radiator, everything in your cooling system, fan. What they were designed to sustain as the heat from the engine's capable of producing, or waste heat, being expelled from the radiator at over a certain period of time. So how much heat energy can the radiator remove or sustain removal of over a certain period of time? That would be your cooling system. Aside from the rest of the engine build, right? Talk about, again, how much power was everything built to sustain over what period of time, right? And that comes down to a percentage that we typically refer to as duty cycle. What do you need your vehicle to do over what period of time? So that comes into, yes, these vehicles can make more power for shorter durations. The idea being, the more power you're making, the less time you can make it. And maintain, well, a handful of things. So
yeah, but now you just brought up a new set of questions we're gonna get. Well, how much power can I make if I want to run my truck for another 150,000 miles? Bon, can you answer that one for me, please? Can you run that calculation for me?
Yeah. No, by that I don't mean time of mileage. I mean time of while you're making power, how long you can make that power for. So, yes. Okay, fun. Right, I'm sure
last question. Come in, running out of time, we got to get to news because I'm excited for news. I only got like 20 minutes left. What would you consider an average oil usage? You can answer that
one. None. You really should be using oil. Overall, assuming you don't have leaks, and I know everybody has leaks, I'd argue you probably should try your best to fix your leaks. I'm one of those kind of perfectionist people. I fix all my leaks as much as possible. And I've never really had an oil consumption problem, and I don't think many people do. So overall, as far as engine design is concerned, in these particular vehicles, with the oil capacity that they have, I would argue that really should be a question. If you're concerned about it, you need to look into it. Other than that, you really shouldn't be consuming measurable amounts of oil over oil change intervals.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave it there.
And just so you know, Michael, if you do end up seeing this, I'm not making fun of you by any means. I understand like your point of wanting to know what these answers are.
You're not the only one asking these questions.
Definitely not.
Don't worry.
Including us many, many years ago, asked the same thing. So, or the same types of questions. But what would you consider the average oil usage to be? It's like, if your truck is using enough oil to be like, I wonder if that's normal, you probably have a problem. And by like usage, if you mean like consumption, like it's burning it, then I would definitely figure out why. Because like any like largely measurable amount could be a problem.
And I think that combines with the compression question. So depending on if we would end up speaking over the phone, where that would end up leading to, or if you came into the shop, I'm sure they'd have a million other things to go with. But if your questions are paired together like that, or you're worried about compression and you're worried about oil usage, then you may want to look into it. Assuming that you're new to this, that's a different story. If this is your first 7.3 Power Stroke, then I suppose, and maybe you haven't gone through this yet, then I guess I wouldn't worry about it too much and just keep your eye on it. But if you're not new to this and you're concerned about it, then I would be concerned about it.
Yeah. Last one here. So he says he's running a TS chip, 4-inch exhaust, air intake, blink pedestal, and a riff-raff billet wheel. He said he doesn't know what's installed for fuel injectors. Probably the easiest way to find out if they're just like factory style fuel injectors would be that it's a Super Duty. So just remove the TS from the PCM. And if the truck idles smoothly at a hot idle, then it's probably stock injectors. That'd be like the first
But what
step.
I can say is that we will deny you custom tuning services unless you know exactly what those fuel injectors are, or you're willing to waive support. Okay? So if you're concerned that these may not be factory fuel injectors, or you're having symptoms that maybe are either, chances are what we end up finding is they're probably factory fuel injectors. They're just worn or have problems, or there are multiple other problems with the vehicle, and the customers are concerned that, well, maybe they are modified fuel injectors because it doesn't seem to be running right. That's a whole different story, and you should know that we can and will deny support, or discuss that with you at least ahead of time. if you don't know what size fuel injectors you have, and you may or may not be having issues with them, the only way you're really going to know is, well, get a receipt from the previous owner, or find some way of verifying what they are, because usually the only way to know that is having paperwork beforehand. Aside from that, chances are you're probably going to have to risk pulling all the fuel injectors out and getting them sent and tested.
Yeah.
Once you get those results back, then you'll know what the fuel injector size is, and then you can let us know. Okay, there's no amount of guessing and checking, and you wouldn't want us to do that either, because there can be tons of problems if we don't know what size fuel injectors they are, let alone who manufactured them and about when they were manufactured. Okay, those are all not only drivability problems, but you don't want us to cause you engine damage, because I don't know how the vehicle is driving after you get it, so I'm just relying on you to say it runs great or doesn't. So that could really mean anything. So if even if you don't have factory fuel injectors, and the idle performance problem isn't that noticeable, depending on the year they were made, they may not be that noticeably different around hot idle. And so you may have been driving it with these problems, and then we open up a whole set of problems when we send you custom tuning for it and you're not ready. So long story short, if you tell us you don't know what size fuel injectors you have, we can't really help you. You need to get those injectors out and tested. Or you need to be aware that you may not ever get it correct, and you may end up doing damage to the vehicle, or overall just having poor drivability.
Yeah. Lastly, he says he wants help getting his truck into best towing shape for upcoming camping season, and any help would be appreciated. Michael, I'll, of course, reach out to this guy. But, yeah, stuff like that, you're best to just call us, schedule a build plan, like we mentioned earlier, on our website. And we can kind of dig into the details more on something like that. All right, now the part I've been excited about this whole time, automotive news. So this is going to be sort of a short segment because, one, we don't have a lot of time, and two, it's kind of the beginning, and it's quite a bit of work to format something like this. There isn't like a lot of big automotive news happening. So our goal is with the news segments is going to be covering like everything automotive, whether it be like new parts that are being built, or like electric vehicle stuff. Today we're covering like trends. So SEMA posts, they do like market research, and they have like statistics and stuff that they put out there. And so we're going to cover some of the trend stuff that they've pointed out. Yeah, anyway, be pretty cool. So the first segment here, this is going to be linked below if you want to grab these from SEMA, but this is going to be in their future trends documentation as of January 2022. And let me get down. What's that?
I think it's I did want to say important notice about as far as these SEMA documents go. Plenty of documents in the news sections we're getting into. It's mostly just going to be, like you said, kind of like a brief overview or what we kind of took away, and we'll try our best to maybe break down. At least that's kind of my goal. But I care a lot about data as well. So I think, like you said, this is the market research team at SEMA. There's, I think, three, or at least there were three notable people that compile this information and produce these documents. I think they only produce a handful of them once or twice a year. But they are, like we're going to be talking about the prediction trends, and some of just market research as far as mostly the entire automotive field. So that covers new vehicles, old vehicles, manufacturing. We talk about manufacturing, production, shipping, retailers, the entire industry at large, I suppose. And so a handful of people that compile that information. And as we go through some of these articles, I'll try my best to throw out the information, or where they get their information from, what articles and statistics, because most of this research that SEMA compiles, those researchers were compiling off of sources like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and other larger industry article. Right?
Well, and if you jump down in the comments or in the description and you want to go download these PDFs, each slide, at least as far as I can tell, each slide has the source listed at the bottom of it. So yes. You can check that out too. And so This is their data collected. This is not data that we collected. We're just reviewing it. So did you want to start on slide 15 here?
Sure. This was the
prediction for electric vehicle sales rising starting in 2015 through 2035. So the electric vehicle sales rising gradually. This document, it's showing like the amount of sales, like starting in 2015 through 2035, the amount of...
So they're showing market share of vehicle by fuel type. So in the attached documents, if you end up finding it, they're showing they start at 2015 and they're predicting what the market may look like, or market share may look like across vehicle fuel types. Yeah. So the largest by far, so even starting from 2015 all the way up to, we can say at 2020, the largest being gasoline. The next largest, honestly, looks to be hybrid. They didn't really break down exactly the percentage here. But throughout the trends, they're predicting that diesel pretty much stays the same, considering our audience is probably mostly focused on that. But diesel powered vehicles are the smallest market share, aside from electrics up until about 2021. And they're predicting that, I would say, mostly the electric and hybrid vehicles they plan on expanding are taking up most of the market share of the gasoline vehicles, with the predicted sales amount being roughly the same, right? So they're estimating a little over 17 million the vehicle powertrain sales, and that was where the trend sort of started in about 2015 in the beginning. Mm-hmm. It dipped off quite heavily in 2020, all the way up through the beginning of 2022, where we are here. Their predictions, but they're predicting that it kind of stabilizes back around 17 million. And from their predictions, it looks to be that they're expecting hybrid and electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids among them, being mostly consuming up the gasoline market share, which is quite large, right? The diesel market share seems to be, they're expecting it to drop off slightly throughout the next, what are we dealing with, 12 years, 13 years?
Yeah. So obviously it's sort of a prediction. I'm not a data analyst or into predictions, however these things are ran, but I would expect that it would be like the diesel, the fact that basically since the beginning of this document, so 2015, like actual data that we have from the past, like 2015 through 2021, diesel sales have been basically the same. Like it hasn't really changed much. Nothing notable anyway. And it's a very small part of light vehicle powertrain sales. And I'm guessing by light vehicle, I mean, are they referring to like pickups also, or are they trying to say
light duty being, I from what I understand here throughout their articles, being anything that's on road under the 22,500 weight rating, I believe, right? So anything under commercial would be my guess.
So diesel sales have remained about the same, if nothing. Matter of fact, they're showing 2020 had a massive drop, and 2021 from the average vehicle sales, just overall vehicle sales, but diesel sales actually were higher than previous. They were growing.
I would say they were about the same because of we're talking percentage wise. And this isn't an accurate graph, right? So this isn't actually broken down. Yeah. So I think it may have increased a bit, but I think my argument would be that it stayed about the same. It stayed stable, at least, compared to the rest of the market, most notably being gasoline vehicles.
Yeah. And
heavy decrease.
I can understand why diesel sales would remain, fairly like about the same over time, and why that would be predicted too, is because it's somewhat understandable that you could replace, your grocery getter with an electric vehicle or a hybrid. You can't haul your trailers and the things you would use a truck for. It can't be replaced by an electric vehicle anytime soon. Like, it's just not going to happen. So, I don't think that's probably going to change. So that's encouraging anyway.
To some degree. I mean, I think there's a lot of different angles, we could look at, but that's where we're in news, at least in this topic. So I just think it's important to bring that information, as well as I'm sure plenty of our audience isn't particularly excited about, the electric market.
Yeah. I think it's cool. I think the electric market is neat. I'm not against it by any means. That's certainly a large topic to get into, though.
Right.
So did you want to jump into the next section here?
So one of the big things that has affected all of us and us at 1023 personally has been some of the supply chain talk. And SEMA had produced, while we were looking through some articles, they were talking pretty heavily about how they're expecting 2022 to kind of turn around. And their analysts had produced some graphs. They had broken down what they expected for the next few years on a per quarter basis. And it entitled, or it talked about all of the different parts about the supply chain that we're going to sort of go through, and how that affected kind of all of us and what they noticed over the past few years. So this is their source is McKinsey and Company, and they have a couple different articles that they cite for these. But they were overall saying that they sort of expected 2022 and later to be a big recovery period for the supply chain. Mm-hmm. And I think we kind of both agree that may not be completely true, or a little over hopeful.
Well, based on the data that we can cover here, it doesn't seem likely.
Right. So they break down a few things. So on page 35 here, we were talking about availability of products across all of the automotive segments. They were talking about manufacturers being able to receive products and their different sources of purchasing products, or materials to manufacture products, and then everything from distribution, storage warehouses, redistribution, and retail.
Yeah. So when McKinsey and Company conducted a survey, and they showed that of the people, all the participants in their survey, 62% of them stated that they wanted to purchase something that wasn't available or was out of stock. And of those 62%, 39% of them decided to switch to a different brand or product because what they were looking for wasn't available. 32% switched to a different retailer. So, like shop at Walmart instead of Amazon, I guess. It would be a switch between retailers, and then between different products or brands would just be like, buying unlimited diesel injectors instead of full force. Obviously, that's not what we're talking about here, but 13%.
I think that could apply to like brake components or fuel pumps or something along those lines, where you end up switching turbochargers, whatever. You end up switching larger manufacturers, or any manufacturer rather.
Versus, you can't find your Motorcraft ICP sensor? Guess it's Dorman.
Right.
Sorry,
so 32% of those 62% that were consumers in the survey switched retailers. And I think we've pretty much experienced that quite a bit, and I think that was our pivot point as well for multiple different types of products, and it's probably going to continue to be, such as, would you like to have your vehicle running, or would you like to not have it running until that part that may or may not
the option for reliably running well is not there anymore. You don't get that choice.
Right.
So 13% decided to wait to purchase, and then 16% decided not to buy. I mean, that's
what I found quite interesting. The 16% that decided not to buy, I'm curious what that actually looked like.
I would be curious what markets that's in. Like, specifically, if that's talking about, like, they're not. I don't know that this is talking about automotive in general. I think right here they're just covering like supply chain overall. But I would suspect that in the automotive side of things, like, the majority of parts that are purchased they're not stuff you're buying because you just feel like buying it. Like, there's a lot of people that upgrade their vehicles, but most of it's like to keep it running. Like, maybe it's to keep it running and upgrade at the same time, but like, you still parts you need to buy. So like, just not buying isn't a choice. So I don't feel like this can apply exactly to automotive, but I'm not sure on that. We can come back to
Well,
that.
on the very next page is actually SEMA conducted the survey at the attendees of the SEMA show in 2021 and their exhibits, and this is actually, I think, a very nice graph that they sort of uh, produced. Was parts manufacturers are the category here, and they're saying that about 49% of the people surveyed that were parts manufacturers saw a significant impact in supply chain, problems. 37% experienced a moderate impact, and about 10% experienced no impact at all. But I think that the biggest thing being the 49% there, and then distributors, and I think we'd be in the category of retailers and installers, but the distributor section, which is directly where our impact comes from, being 58%. And I think it's pretty fair to say that almost all, if not every, person in this survey would have been automotive related. So I think that's quite significant, and it's interesting to see that the distributor section was seeing more impact. And you can look at it a bunch of different ways, but I think it's pretty easy to say that manufacturers just weren't able to keep up. And then distributors, well, they still had to sell them, or they made promises to sell them. And so I think that impact became quite high on them.
Yeah. Well, here's the problem that I see, like with the prediction that, and we're seeing this prediction from every side of the market, or every like news outlet, is that, things are going to get better at the end of this year. Why I sort of disagree, based on other things and also this data here, is that up to this point, over the last 6 months to a year, which I believe this was over the last 6 months is what this specifically was covering, was that there's a very big difference. There's a very way higher percentage of parts manufacturing that has suffered, had a massive impact or loss of production. There is a very large, much larger percentage of distribution. So the people that make the parts, the people that warehouse the parts for you to sell it to retailers like us who sell it to you, they're way higher. But the retailers, the people like us at the end of the line that you would purchase from, are way lower, have a way lower impact. All that tells me is that it just hasn't hit us hard enough yet, because you cannot have the restraints and the lack of manufacturing. Like for a while, your distribution can buffer that. There usually is a buffer there.
Absolutely.
Once that buffer runs out and manufacturing hasn't picked back up, or let alone not even pick back up to keep up now, but making up for the fact that distribution, you have to recover. I don't think we've seen the peak of this yet. I don't think we're anywhere near the peak of this yet. We're talking like distribution with a massive 60% of a significant impact, and we're only at 40% on retailers. Of course, this is one small piece of it, but we haven't seen the impacts yet. So even if manufacturing gets back in place and they are able to get back to normal capacity, it's not going to refill distribution's supplies. And then that is definitely where we're going to start seeing issues. And we are starting to see a lot more issues. It's becoming a very big problem, especially from out of country manufacturing.
And I think that was one of the big things too, just to summarize that part of the a lot of more places than we had expected, right? So actually on the very next page, 61% of parts manufacturers changed their or looked into changing their suppliers to be foreign rather than domestic. So there's way more information on this that you could follow up on yourself. But the largest point of that was that a lot of manufacturers not only were having trouble, but their biggest problems were sourcing them domestically, rather than dealing with the problems of sourcing them foreign. So they switched their sources. So beyond that, talking about the buffer that we're probably running out of right now, I think it's important to maybe think about what that's going to look like when it starts affecting retailers more. So when the distributors that buffer has run out, and what those effects actually look like in the recovery process. I'm not so, I may be a little bit doubtful in saying that I don't think it's going to be something along the lines of, oh, we can start selling orders again. We can start selling these products again. I kind of have a feeling that not everybody is financially prepared, especially the distributors, to completely attempt to recover that. And I expect it to probably be a little bit slower than we'd hope for.
Yeah. Well, that's all I got time for today. I appreciate you guys listening. If you enjoyed covering news topics, and we certainly can cover lots more, like I said, feel free to shoot us a comment, shoot us an email. I would love to hear from you. I've been Dusty.
I've been Vaughn.
See you guys next time.